Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, Area Sales Manager Steven Wessel from the Southeast Missouri and Northeast Arkansas area joins us with an update on his territory. Steven highlights what happened last year in his area. He talks about local challenges and what farmers are doing to overcome them. Hear what pests and diseases farmers face in Steven's area due to their diverse cropping system they have markets for in the Bootheel of Missouri. Find out what Merschman Seeds varieties farmers are growing in Steven's area.
Welcome to Merschman Seeds Cup of Joe. My name is Steven Wessel. I'm an area sales manager for Merschman Seeds for Southeast Missouri and Northeast Arkansas. And today we have our normal crew on with Joe Merschman, Ben Pieper, Lynn Williams, and Turk Regeniter.
Wonderful introduction. Thanks for joining us today, Steven. First off, tell us what the weather's like in Southeast Missouri and the Bootheel right now.
A little cool, probably where it ought to be seasonally. We're expected highs in the low 50s today. We've been wet for the last couple of weeks. Actually, we had been a little bit warmer than this, up until early part of this week. We had several days last week and over the weekend in the mid 70s. So, and that's I think the second little stretch we've had since mid-February where we've had 2 to 3 days in a row, 70 plus degree weather. So, a little warm, a little early for us, but it's Southeast Missouri. We're kind of used to it.
That'll definitely get the farmers ready to rock and roll, thinking about planting and getting ready for this spring. So kind of one of our common themes and the way we like to start this off is talking about what happened last year. And, every year has its own challenges. And what are some of the challenges that you faced in Southeast Missouri, Northeast Arkansas? And what are some of the ways that guys are changing some habits to try to offset some of those challenges from last year?
Probably the biggest challenge we faced last year was just the extreme drought that we were in with the heat. We went over basically 2 months without a measurable rain down here. So that really caused a lot of issues, both with growth of all the crops and also in the latter stages, just getting soybeans up that were planted late, especially during our double crop or wheat beans. There was major issues on guys just getting a stand just because it was so hot and so dry. The ground was literally, if it got worked, was literally drying out underneath the soybeans where they had adequate moisture at planting, and 3 days later the beans were essentially laying in 4 inches of dry dirt. So that was probably the biggest factor that we had to face last year overall, and it stayed dry well into harvest. I mean, it was probably more latter part of October into November before we actually started picking up some precipitation again to catch up from the lack of it during the summer.
So what would they do different in order to try to drought proof themselves in those situations?
There's the earlier planning would probably be the biggest thing, and one of the few things they could really do to counteract what we went through last year. And that is seeming to be a trend down here is guys are pushing the planting dates up, especially on soybeans, to very, very early dates. But one, they're seeing the higher yields out of the soybeans. It's also they're getting through the majority of the growing season when we do seem to get a little bit more precipitation than what we had last year. But I will say what we had last year was it was very abnormal. At least it's been abnormal for the past 5, 6, 7 years down here. We had not had a late dry summer like that in quite a while, maybe even going back to the drought we had in 2012.
So what is the average? You talk about moving the planting dates earlier. So what is like your crop insurance planting date for corn and soybeans, and how early do guys push their soybean planting dates in your neck of the woods?
So we're seeing a push. We've had a lot of guys in the past several years that are moving, closer to the insurance date, which in the county I'm in, Scott County right here, I want to say is April 15th, I think either April 10th or April 15th, I want to say. But we have several guys that are pushing that date into, if they can do it the last week of March, maybe even closer to the third week of March on the soybean planting. And they're actually, a lot of these people are transitioning to planting soybeans first and then waiting and planting the corn later once the ground actually warms up, where the corn can actually get out of the ground in a week instead of just laying there for 3 weeks and not doing a thing.
It's definitely a common trend that we see. Even talking to a lot of our sales managers, the past 3 interviews that we've done, earlier planted soybeans is definitely something guys are realizing, that it's low-hanging fruit when it comes to trying to push the soybean yields for sure. So as you're looking into the growing season that we're having now, what challenges do you see? What challenges do you think farmers are going to face rolling into this early spring?
It's probably the same challenges we face every year, especially with the earlier planted soybeans. We're going to be extending the growing season out on those particular fields. So, if we have more of a normal, adequate rainfall season, growing season, the weed control is going to probably be the biggest issue, just because the plants are literally going to be out there longer. Even our early planted soybeans down here, last week of March planted soybeans, those beans are still not being harvested until second week of September. So, you've got 5 months there almost, of the beans out there in the field that they've got to try to keep the weeds out of. So, that's going to probably be the biggest challenge with any early planting movement.
Stephen, do you have much trouble with slugs in the cover crops such as cereal rye, when they go in and plant real early like this, and they haven't terminated that cereal rye crop, and does that cause you much trouble? Because we don't have that much of an issue to the north, but we hear it more down your way.
We had the slugs showed up 3 or 4 years ago, where we had a lot of guys. There have been a little bit of a push in our hill ground to the cover crops, and there was some scattered issues. It was I think the same year that the guys over in Southern Illinois really got hammered hard. It was a lot more sporadic on my side. I don't think we have near the cover crop though than what they do in, say, Southern Illinois. So it's not as big a deal. And then once you get down where I'm at and going south into the flat country, there's very little, I would say probably less than 5 to 10% max of any sort of cover crop. And even where the vast majority of that is maybe down in the sand country, where they plant, a very low rate of wheat or rye or something like that in the fall. And it is for as much wind erosion on the sand as it is, for normal cover crop applications.
You do bring up an interesting point, and something we talked about on the before we got started filming. What all crops are grown in your area? Because up here in southeast Iowa, it's a corn, soybeans, and a few acres of wheat. You're definitely in a different part of the world.
Oh, absolutely. We probably, if you look, definitely in our footprint as a company, but maybe even nationwide, we are probably as diverse as any region in the country. We obviously have the standby corn, soybeans, wheat, grain sorghum in some places where there's a market for it. But then we also have, big acreages of cotton, of rice. We have peanuts have actually started to take a foothold down in the southern end of the Bootheel. We have pockets here locally where potatoes are grown. We also have the acreages down south where you get into the melon crops, your watermelons, cantaloupes, things like that. Even a few small acreages of like pea production, like purple hull peas in isolated areas. So just the general farming, we kind of cover the entire spectrum down here. Well,
one of the things I always found interesting in the Bootheel, I remember asking a farmer, I said, when do when do you quit planting? In other words, when is it too late to plant? And the farmer said, when we get done. I go, no. I mean, do you have a date where you have to quit planting? No, we plant till we get done. And what he was trying to impress upon me, your growing season is so long down there. Like you say, you can start in March. And we have had situations where we're on flood ground where the Mississippi reseeded, was planted even into the first week of August and still made a decent crop of soybeans. So you have, like you said, a very, very long growing season, which is foreign to most of the northern areas because we have a date where if we plant it, it won't amount to anything, but you seem to be able to finish that crop.
Yeah, exactly. We had, for example, I had a couple growers here locally last year that it wasn't, it was in flood ground, but it wasn't from flooding. It was the dryness issue where they had soybeans that they planted around the 18th of June, which is really a normal planting date for down here for flood ground or for our wheat ground. Ground dried out from underneath them. We did not get another measurable rain in that specific area until around the 18th or 19th of July. And they went in on the replant, over a matter of 3-4 days from like the 20th to the 25th of July. And a lot of those beans were still cutting 50 plus bushels last year, which was frankly phenomenal because after we got that rain that allowed them to get the moisture to plant, we didn't really receive another measurable rain until right at the end of August. And then I think we picked up a rain maybe in late September, early October. But those beans that planted the 21st, 22nd of July, they made 50 bushel on maybe 4 inches of precipitation.
Stephen, the other thing you have, because you have so many diverse crops out there, and you have the cotton growing out there, you have a lot of dicamba movement. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. It's widespread.
It's just because of the long spray period. And has that changed any for this year?
As of right now, it has not. For Missouri, we are still under what's on the label of a June 30th cutoff on soybean spraying with dicamba and a July 30th cutoff on spraying cotton with dicamba. So as of right now, nothing has changed.
With that diverse cropping system that you guys have markets for down there, what kind of diseases, pests, pathogens do you guys fight because of having that wide diversity of crops?
We really don't face anything drastically different than, say, what you all face, especially on the soybean side. The normal pathogens that we have, whether it's rhizoc, pythium, phytophthora, whatnot. We do probably the one that we've had issues with sporadically in the past is target spot on soybeans, but that is one that it does not overwinter up here, so it has to be blown in from the deep south. Frankly, we haven't had a lot of problem with it in the last several years because we haven't really had any major weather systems like a hurricane that would come up from the Gulf and bring it up to us. So, it hasn't been a big issue for us recently.
You do have pockets of root knot and nematode, particularly following the potatoes and cotton, and that can affect the soybeans.
That's correct.
And I know in those areas, if you don't pay attention to the root knot nematode or tolerance, and then also now with Trinemco, which is a solution that we have now for this year, we'll be interested to see how that impacts those root knot areas. They can be very detrimental.
Oh, it's a lot of the guys that are in, the very sandy areas. And I have one in particular that's starts about 15 miles away from where I live, southeast of me in kind of central Scott County, where they grow a lot of the potatoes. On that ground, and it doesn't matter whether they're planting soybeans behind the potato harvest or even as a full season crop, even with irrigation, a lot of times 30 to 40 bushel soybeans is about all they can expect. So, I'm working on some guys currently. We might be able to get some acreages out with one of our root knot varieties, and also put the starting line plus on it that has the Trinimco in it. And, I would like to see us get out there. I think we'd have the potential, maybe run that production, say behind wheat, where we could maybe get that average up closer to 50, which would be a huge improvement for those growers in those areas.
Well, fortunately, thanks to genetic tolerance, Frogeye and stem canker are two that you don't see a lot down your way, and that's because we have resistance. But if you plant a variety that doesn't have some type of level of tolerance to it, it can be a problem in the Mid-South every year, because we always worry about those whenever, because we know you got some guys down there that want to plant 3s and even 2s, and we go, gosh, you got to have that tolerance to stem canker and frogeye, or you're going to be underwater before you even start.
Right. You very seldom hear any producers asking about the stem canker, but the frogeye is a definite tripping point. I have certain areas where they will literally not plant a variety if it doesn't have a good frogeye tolerance to it. And it doesn't matter if it's a 100 bushel potential soybean variety. If it doesn't have frogeye, they will not plant it, because they've had it come in the fall and just absolutely wipe a crop out.
That segues nicely into what products are you excited about for the 2023 growing season, and what kind of maturities do you guys plant in southern southeast Missouri, northeast Arkansas?
With the stretched out growing season we probably have one of the wider spreads on maturity groups that we use down here. So we'll predominantly start. We have a few guys, like Joe mentioned, that may go into the early 3s, but the vast majority of our customers the earliest they'll go is around the 3.6, and then we'll go all the way out to the 4.8, 4.9. So, our big hitters on the early side are obviously our Kennedy, the new Trumans, making a move this year. We're going to see a lot of those out this year. The Austin has been a standby for us, along with the Denver, and then we transition from there. We kind of skip up, and we kind of have a big 3 of our 4.6 Memphis, the 4.7 Nashville, and the 4.8 Dallas. So those are I'd say probably our top 6, top 7 sellers down here. Covers the entire maturity group that we need.
And last week, talking with Brett, do you see guys in your area that do the same thing as far as what we were talking about? Do they plant the whole gamut, or is it pocketed? Like, do certain guys just stay late, certain guys stay early, or are they planting across the spectrum to mitigate risk from either drought stress or management practices?
For the most part, Lynn, they are predominantly planting a spread. I do have guys that literally have the 3.6 to 4.8, 4.9 spread. I have others that will maybe start with like a 4.2 and go to a 4.8. I've had a few customers that actually just plant 3.8s to 4.1s or 4.2s. So, but typically they're spreading it out. They're, at least a half of a maturity group spread pretty much on every farm. But you do have a few outliers that'll tighten that up.
Yeah, the guys in the South definitely have one of the most vast knowledge of the Merschman product lineup, second to probably you, just because of that spread. We talked about us up north back when I was in ASM, that we kind of giggle that we know a 2.8 to a 3.8, and that's all we really need to know. Where you guys are, could even get into sometimes the 3.2s to a 4.8. So the product knowledge that you guys have to have is pretty immense.
Yeah, and you keep us on our toes because you start first and you end last. So we're constantly shipping product into your territory from either our production point down at Rough Diamond or out of West Point. So you keep us on our toes all the time, because it seems like there's not a day goes by that you can't plant all summer long almost, it seems like.
Oh, it's, we've had years, and we don't like to have this, but like you'd mentioned earlier, the August planting, we had a year, it's been, I guess, 8-9 years ago, where we had a very late river flood that affected us from basically Charleston south in southeast Missouri. And we had guys that got back into the fields anywhere from the 25th of July that year and I think the last guy I remember planting that year was either the 16th or 17th of August. So just simply because, a lot of the cases, the landlords, they wanted to see a crop out there. And for the most part, they were at least able to get something off of it. There was, the late July, maybe the first week of August, planted beans on average ran 20 to 30 bushel that year. Now we got into some of those acres that went out after the 15th of August, and they just ended up, they didn't make. We caught a frost in mid or late November that kind of took them out. But for the most part, they were at least able to recoup something off of those acres that year. So it's crazy. We like you said, we start super early and we plant the full season, and it seems like about the time we have some planters stopping is about the same time we have combines hitting the fields in other areas. So it's a unique situation sometimes.
Yeah, I always say the farmers down there, they back the planter in and then they pull the combine out, because
absolutely
that's the way it works.
Absolutely.
And it's not that they're harvesting the crop they just planted. It's one that they planted way back when, and particularly the soybeans, one of the earlier planted crops, and even corn. I mean, you do a lot of corn harvest in August if it's the right conditions. So, yeah, you guys always are working, that's for sure. And what I always found unique about the Bootheel of Missouri was, obviously we know about the big nematode earthquake and what it did to the soils. And all of a sudden in the middle of a big field, there's this big round sand area, and that was pushed up when the earthquake came. It like a volcano, it pushed up these sand. What do you call them? What do you call those sand?
Just the sand boils.
Sand boil, yeah.
Call them.
So when you pick a soybean variety or a corn variety, you got this great soils all around, and all of a sudden you got to go through this big section. It can be an acre or two of pure sand, and so just an interesting area down there, and of course a lot of Civil War history too down in the Bootheel, Missouri. So.
Oh, absolutely. We, some of the very first battles during the Civil War were fought down here. Probably one of the most interesting ones, and for historians, it would be a huge what if scenario. But there was a battle at Belmont, Missouri, which is down on the Mississippi River, south of Bird's Point, south of Cairo, on the Missouri side of the river, that was fought in late 1861. It was one of Ulysses S. Grant's first battles that he fought, and he just narrowly escaped capture in that battle from the Confederates. And that would have been a huge what if for the rest of the Civil War if the Confederates would have captured him at that battle, because it was very close. So just a lot of neat history down here. From there, New Madrid, it was not a huge hotbed of Civil War activity, but there's a lot of that here close. So Cape Girardeau was one of his, when he was first promoted to a general, was one of Grant's first headquarters areas. So a lot of neat history.
So Steven, we've talked about Steven, the agronomist, and the Merschman seed salesman. What makes Steven tick, and what's some of the passions that you have outside of work?
Well, I just kind of broke the barrier on one. I am a huge history buff, if you will, especially of Civil War history. Love to read about it. But then outside of that, families first and foremost. Seems like we're chasing our 3 children around all the time, whether it's ball games or whatnot. And then, of course, kind of the old standard, love to get out in nature, hunt and fish, do those types of things. So between the kids and that kind of eats up all the spare time.
That definitely has a tendency to happen.
Our Civil War knowledge here in Iowa, we just have to know one thing. That there was a couple cannonballs shot across the Des Moines River in Croton, and they hit a house. That was it. That's as much as we have. So it wouldn't be too much studying in our case, because we got a couple cannonballs lapped at us or shot at us, and that's it.
So I guess one thing I did want to kind of hone in here, there's a lot of conversation about the markets. Turk, have you been paying attention to the corn markets and what's going on?
The markets kind of reacted a little bit negative by the end of the week, even though they were fairly bullish reports. But it just kind of goes to show you that probably the old crop might be a little overpriced right now, and the new crop might be subject to some further lows. It really is going to depend on what happens with weather, like it does every year. But the fact remains that the soybean supplies worldwide are the lowest, the seventh lowest in history, and so there is room for a lot of fireworks yet this summer. It's a long ways before we got this crop in the bin. And so stay tuned. But if you got old crop in the bin, it may be too late, but I think it's going down further.
Well, and Ben's got a first-hand report from some winter production MS Tech has going on in Argentina, and they're harvesting now. So what did you just hear?
So a lot of our winter production down south is. We won't know until we get it. So it's a little bit shaky for some of our South American seed lines that we have, and we're going to be thankful when it shows up because it could be pretty scarce.
It's because of the dry weather.
WASDE's report dropped that a record amount in Argentina in 1 month. So yeah, it's and they expect it to go down lower.
So, like you say, watch the weather, not only here, but worldwide. Yeah.
But La Nina is officially been declared over, and we're in neutral. So, which means more moisture for the Midwest.
And hopefully the Mid-South, right, Steven?
Absolutely.
Timely moisture, hopefully, not just moisture.
Yeah, as long as you all just don't send an excess amount of moisture from your way down, because I don't need a big river.
But they also said that by next fall will probably be an El Nino, which means increased amount of hurricanes.
Hurricanes aren't a bad thing down here every now and then. They've bailed us out a time or two on a late season dry stretch. So, but it can cause some issues. And
March 15th is the deadline to get signed up for crop insurance. I'm sure everybody's crop insurance agents got a hold of them and said, hey, let's get something done. But the $5.91 for corn and $13.76 for soybeans is the prices that we'll be working with.
Great. Well, that brings us to the joke for today, and I want you to know that after my joke that I told 2 weeks ago, I got suspended for a week, and that's why I wasn't here last week, and we had to have Brett's grandson step in and take over for me. I appreciate the help. But anyhow, I said, well, this time I'm going to do, instead of 3 bad jokes, I'm just going to do 1 good one, okay? So today's joke is a senior citizen called her husband during his drive home. Herman, I just heard on the news, that there's a car going the wrong way on Interstate 80. Please be careful. Herman replied, it's just not one car, there's hundreds of them.
Yep.
So there you go. So hopefully I'll get my job back next week after this one. But Steven, we appreciate giving us the information about the Bootheel of Missouri and all the problems that you have. Just like all farmers, every day they got to get up and work because there's somebody working against them, Mother Nature and whatnot. And thanks everybody today, and we appreciate your business. We hope that you and your family are safe and healthy. We'll see you next week.